Hi, and welcome to our Keplers Literary Foundation virtual space. While we wait for everyone to join the webinar, I'm going to let you know how this event will run. I'm Angela, and this is such a fangirl moment for me. I'm delighted to introduce Cassandra, Clare, and Holly Black, two of our favorite authors, on the book birthday of Chain of Iron. We are so thrilled that you're all joining us here tonight, and we all get to celebrate together. But first, a little about us. Keplers Literary Foundation is the non-profit partner of Keplers Books in Menlo Park. Thank you so much for joining us today, and to anyone who donated in support of this event, and to those who bought an extra copy of Chain of Iron for a Title I school. Your support means so much to us and means we can continue bringing you wonderful events like this one. It also means we can continue programs like supporting the Title I Ravenswood School District in East Palo Alto, to whom this school year we've donated 1,600 books, so every student can read along with our virtual author program. You can find our online calendar at keplers.org under Refresh the Page, where you can sign up for our newsletter too. And tonight we celebrate Cassandra Clare and her wonderful new book, Chain of Iron. Yes, I'm fangirling. Yes, of course I am. Cassandra Clare, named the Queen of Fantasy by the Wall Street Journal, is the author of the #1 New York Times, USA Today, Wall Street Journal, and Publishers Weekly best-selling Shadowhunter Chronicles that were adapted as a movie and as a television series. She's also the co-author of the Magisterium series with Holly Black. Her books have more than 50 million copies in print worldwide and have been translated into more than 35 languages, which is phenomenal. And tonight she's chatting with the wonderful Holly Black, her longtime critique partner and the #1 New York Times bestselling author of over 30 novels for kids and teens, the most recent of which is How the King of Elfhame Learned How to Hate Stories. She's been a finalist for an Eisner and a Lodestar Award, the recipient of the Mythopoeic Award, a Nebula, and a Newbery Honor. Her books have been translated into 13 languages worldwide and adapted for film. What a dream team we have tonight. After their conversation on the writing process and their craft, we are going to go to questions from you. To submit a question, click the Q&A button and send us your questions, and we will get to as many as we can. If you need to reach a Keplers team member for support, please send an email to keplers.org and one of our support team will get back to you. If you have audio or video problems throughout the event, we recommend restarting Zoom, which solves most connection issues. We have one last thing. We picked 2 audience names out of a hat to get a special prize, a Chain of Iron embroidery kit. And our 2 lucky winners are, there's my drum roll, Marisol Avalos and Alicia Guerrero. Please note, these are going to come from the publisher, not with your book. Congratulations to Marisol and Alicia. And without further ado, let's start the show. Okay, Cassie and Black, Cassie and Holly.
Hello.
Hello. You have 50 million copies in print?
So they tell me.
I was like, what? That's amazing. Good job.
Thank you. I printed them all myself.
So congratulations on the release of Chain of Iron. How does it feel to finally have the second book in the last hours out so that you can actually talk about it?
It's exciting. I've had it, I've known what happens in it for a long time. You've known what happens in it for a long time, but there's a really big gap between, as you know, between turning in a book and then actually having it come out. So it's exciting to finally have people be able to read it and, have reactions to what happens in it.
That's true. I did the other day say, it's so great the third book is coming out.
I know. I was like, second book.
All right. So I got some questions. So Chain of Iron has as one of its plot lines, and this is not a spoiler. It is on the jacket copy. Um, that there is a hunt for a killer involved, and as a person who has spent time with you on tour and on airplanes, I know that when you have your headphones on, you are listening to murder podcasts. And so I was really curious about whether some of that found its way into this book.
I mean, I'm sure it did. It's true. I'm always listening to murder podcasts or watching murder documentaries or mystery shows. And I think definitely some of that did make it in there. Like the first real like sort of serial killer that we know of uh is Jack the Ripper. And I've definitely listened to my number of podcasts about Jack and various theories about who he might have been and how he operated and all that. And that I think that definitely does inform the book and just the sort of clues that the killer leaves behind. This is obviously, not your this is a book with a lot of supernatural elements in it. So really the big question facing our sort of fearless heroes as they try to track down this killer is, is this a serial killer or is this some kind of a, demonic force or, a magical creature, which is obviously not the case with Jack the Ripper. But I think a lot of
Allegedly.
allegedly, right? That's a theory, definitely, there's definitely some theories in that area. And one of our very close friends, Green Johnson, is an obsessive Jack the Ripper, like a file. So she knows everything there is to know about Jack the Ripper. She once kept me up all night in a hotel room just telling me about Jack the Ripper. You know how she knows everything about
Is
something.
there
What?
it's like a word for that, like the ripper or ripperologist, or there's some
Ripperologist.
kind of
Ripperologist. She's kind of a ripperologist. So, and I hadn't actually known that much about Jack the Ripper before that, but after that, I knew a lot. And she co-wrote the Whitechapel Fiend with me, which is actually the story in the Shadowhunterverse that does deal with Jack the Ripper and does suggest that there's a supernatural element to it. So this is not Jack because this is taking place like a good 20 years after Jack the Ripper was active, but definitely draws on, the whole Jack the Ripper. If you have a killer stalking the streets of London, murdering people, it's always going to echo, some aspects of the Jack the Ripper story. And I think, listening to all those murder podcasts, even the unsolved ones that I know drive you crazy because they're unsolved, definitely helps.
unsolved.
Sometimes
Excellent.
you don't
All
know.
right. So, beg pardon?
I said sometimes you just don't know who did it.
Um, okay. It's annoying to me. It's like a book without an ending.
There
You
is
know,
a
I
book.
read the ending first.
There are books. There are, I'm driven bananas in books if they don't actually give you a answer because I believe fiction is meant to be more meaningful than real life.
Oh yeah, I do.
So I'm made insane by murder mystery books that don't have an answer.
So you've been writing in the Shadowhunter world now for some time. But this is, I believe, the first book where you have the children of characters from previous series who are actually the protagonists. And I'm curious, what are the particular challenges of that? And also, as a person who now has, seen some people have children, how much of how does that change the way that you see sort of generational stories
That's
moving?
interesting. I mean, I think for me, definitely it's been a challenge because in YA books, one of the big challenges we always have is why are these teenagers, the people who are the best people to solve this problem, fight this war, lead this revolution, and not adults? And that's sort of the story of most YA is, why is why this person, why this time? And it's made much more difficult when they have parents around because certainly from my observation of people and their children, most of whom are still pretty young, you're literally not letting your kids go out and fight danger on their own. You try to the urge of the parent is to protect their child rather than to send them out to fight the dragon or the evil king or the whatever by themselves. And so we have to figure out ways in which our protagonists are the central actors in the narrative, and why is that they're the people that can do the stuff the adults can't do. It's very difficult when they have parents, and it's even more difficult when their parents are nice people. They
And famous
also
heroes.
yes, famous heroes. It's kind of horrible. So like,
So
like
is this something that you decided on and then instantly regretted?
I wouldn't say it was instant. It was a slow, gradual, creeping realization of dread and horror when I was like, maybe I could just kill them all. All the parents are dead. And then I was like, wow, my audience would be really, really angry if I just offed everybody from the infernal devices. It was like, that was the day of the terrible earthquake. They all fell into a hole, and then their kids had to carry on without them. And so, even though, for plot expediency purposes, it would have been much better to send all the parents away, I couldn't. I had to figure out how to have the kids have agency and, be the people who are solving these mysteries and doing this stuff without their parents' knowledge, even though their parents are good, nice people who would, intervene to help their kids if they knew about any of it. So I would say that was a definitely a challenge. I mean, it's been interesting. It's kind of fun to work in a way that like you don't see that often in YA, which is like everybody pretty much has a happy, healthy family. But I don't know if I'd do it again.
You managed to bring in some ringers who don't have that healthy
I
family.
know. I was like, oh,
You
thank
needed
God
some
for
ringers.
Cordelia, because we don't actually know that much about her parents and her family life. So I can do whatever I would want with them. Whereas if I was like, and in the intervening years, Will has become a terrible alcoholic, people would have been very upset. I would have been upset. You would have been upset. You like Will.
I love Will. I also like drunks.
Yeah, that's true. Probably. Well, in her head, if you're feeling about him that bad.
So, you are legendary for writing second books that rip out readers' hearts, um, and stomps all over them. And so, I was hoping that on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the worst, you could tell the audience how worried they should be.
I mean, I feel like it's uh probably it's like a Clockwork Prince level of pain, if that makes sense. I think the worst second book ending I've written is Lord of Shadows. That's a real bad second book ending. It really upsetting for a lot of people, and for me. I think this is more of a emotional cliffhanger. It's not like we end with our heroes like literally like dangling over a fire or something like that, but it definitely ends with everybody in very an emotional state of unrest is the word, like what am I thinking of? I have aphasia. Uh
Um,
Unresolved.
Misery.
No. Misery, to be fair.
No,
Definitely like
I mean,
topics that
yes.
are reasonable. But I
Some
think
things are up
unresolved,
in the air.
I think there's a certain mix of, some people are miserable, some people are having issues that are as yet unresolved, and some people are sort of wrestling with the idea of what happens when you get the thing you want, but you don't get it the way you want it. So I would say that
Right.
both like Lucy and Cordelia are in the situation of, well, gotten the thing that I want, and now what? You know?
Right. 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 All right. So speaking of, we went out of Chain of Gold. We left our heroes. Well, we left Jim Cordelia in a fake engagement.
Hmm.
And so it's a classic piece of business. Who doesn't like it? But can you talk about why you like it and what made you want
Hmm.
to write that structure?
I love a fake engagement, fake marriage, fake engagement. I like all that stuff. I think because a fake engagement, or you know, um gives you, or a fake relationship really of any kind, gives you an opportunity for your characters who are not in a relationship really to experience that level of intimacy that they would if they were in the relationship. So suddenly you have this thing where they're, just friends or not in a relationship or whatever, but they're in this position of, doing things, some, things in public, like, putting on this sort of performance of being in love and being affectionate in front of all of these people. And, it's always the question of how much of it is acting and how much of it is the thing that they really want to do anyway. And then there's also, the parts where they're alone together and they're dealing with, this sort of intimacy that is, been that they've entered into while they're pretending, to themselves that they have no deeper feelings for each other, yet they're constantly thrust into these positions where they must exchange confidences, work together to act as if they're in love in front of everybody. And, I think it's that stuff that's like really fun to work with,
Mhm.
because, suddenly they're accessing this whole level of like emotional and physical intimacy that they wouldn't be
Mhm.
otherwise.
Mm. Um, so could you talk a little bit about, sort of changing tacks, the influence of Great Expectations on the series, and about the other books that sort of fed into it?
Yeah, when I was working on Infernal Devices, it's sort of based a little bit on Tale of Two Cities by Dickens. And I feel like Dickens gets undersold as like a writer of like romantic fiction. Like when I first encountered Dickens in like high school and college, it was definitely sold to me as like this is about Victorian debtors prison and like the struggles of the working class, and it's not about that. But Vic Dickens was very romantic, and like there are a lot of beautiful like speeches, in Great Expectations and in uh Tale of Two Cities that are, really great, like love speeches. The whole, you're the last dream of my soul, or the speech that Pip gives Estella, you have been in everything that I have ever looked upon. You are part of the little good in me, part of the greatness that is the evil, like it's this great speech of love. Even though I think what's interesting about Great Expectations is that it's about this sort of a great love that Pip has for Estella, who is this person he doesn't know at all. Like, he grows up in next near this big, tumble down mansion that was once very wealthy and beautiful and has now fallen to pieces. And we see that in sort of, Tatiana Blackthorne in her falling down mansion, and Grace, her ward, her daughter. And that James is sort of pulled into their life in the same way that Pip is pulled into Miss Havisham and Estella's life. And in the same way that Miss Havisham brought up Estella to sort of be her revenge on the world, it's the same, kind of thing with Tatiana and Grace. But I wanted to play around a little bit with the idea of who Estella is, and also just the fact that Great Expectations is really about how Pip loves an idea. He's in love, not really in love with Estella. He doesn't know Estella. Like, he doesn't know who she is. He doesn't know what she's like. And there's almost an implication in the book that Miss Havisham has sort of erased her personhood, that she is only the thing that Miss Havisham wanted her to be. And like, what does she really have in terms of like her own feelings and desires? And so I wanted to mess around with that a little bit. And there is a character, Birdie, in the Great Expectations book who is in love with Pip, but he doesn't have any time for her because she's not Estella. She's not this like,
Mhm, mhm.
creature who, sort of symbolizes all of the things that he wants. And so I wouldn't say it's not a retelling, it's kind of a reimagining, but I wanted to play around with the idea of unrequited love, and of also of loving someone, you know, um, who you may not, who, and about loving someone unrequitedly, and how much of that is what you imagine them to be.
So, let's see. I was also wondering if you could talk about, the challenges and pleasures of a long running series. Specifically, I know that you have been working on Swordcatcher, your first adult novel. Um, and it's a new world, it's new magic, it's new. And, you know, obviously one of the challenges I imagine of, a series like Shadowhunters is that each series and each book has to be fresh and relevant and exciting. And I'm but I imagine that there's some um, pleasure in not having to invent everything. So
Yeah, I
I'm
mean,
curious, like,
right? It's a
if you
challenge.
could compare and contrast a little bit about,
Well, I know you just have been working on your own adult novel, so we've both been doing that, and it is a weird,
new.
new, and different for both of us, different genres than we've really tackled before. Um, so it's very weird to jump into that, and it's interesting. I think it presents different challenges. With Shadow Hunters, I always want to keep it different. Every round of new characters telling the new story. The story has to be different from previous stories. The characters have to feel different from the characters that came before. But I can also riff off stuff that happened earlier. I do to some extent. Play off my character's knowledge of existing world building pieces and tropes in the Shadowhunter world. I kind of figure, they know what Parabatai are, and we can kind of play around with that, with Dark Artifices. Malcolm Fade was kind of a riff on
Right.
Magnus, so it really helped if you knew who Magnus was. Like, I felt like creating a character like that who seemed a little Magnusy would make people trust him. And it did seem to work that way. And I think that, Last Hours plays around a little with the idea of love triangles, and it plays off of the love triangle that existed in Infernal Devices. So it, I think, is nice to have that base of knowledge, but it's a challenge to keep everything new, but it's also kind of fun to riff off what went before. With Swordcatcher, it's fun to be able to make up everything from first principles. If I can, there are definitely times where I have an idea for something I'd like to do, but I know it's not possible in the Shadowhunter world. I've made, the rules are the rules. I have to stick by them. Like, if I say something isn't possible in this world, then it's not possible. So it's interesting to be able to kind of start from the beginning and everything is possible. So I think that's both good and bad, because you're like, everything is possible. Oh God, everything is possible.
That's how I feel.
No. I'm done.
So of Iron is also at least, and do you want to talk a little bit about how that affected your process? And you know, how was it without, without retreats, without writing dates, alone in your house?
I don't like it. The very informative response. I mean, I don't know. It's weird, right? Because, like, oh, the last time that I was sort of out and traveling or anywhere was when I was on tour for Chain of Gold, and then you came to see me because we did that event together in Atlanta, and then we went straight home. And by the time we got home, like, everything was different. And for a couple of days,
Yeah,
we worked together, and then
yeah,
we were like, okay, I guess for a while we're gonna have to stop, working in the same space. And first, one of us was like, okay, we're gonna, I gotta stay home, and we sort of slowly,
right,
like, went off to our own separate places. And I don't think that it ever occurred to me or to really any of us that we would not be able to get back together again for a year, more than a year,
right,
a year and a half.
right.
Yeah, exactly. And it was, I mean, I don't know, it's like it was a slow car crash trauma rather than in a very quick one. But
Right.
I mean, I remember I'd already written Chain of Iron and I got it back. And so I was working on editing it. And it was just it was a very strange experience, because I was, I'm used to working with you and with Kelly and with our other friends in a group. And so not having the group environment, not having my assistant, was something I definitely had to sort of adjust to. And, we usually go on retreat, like we'll go to the beach or we'll go to the mountains or whatever, and we'll go for like a couple of weeks and we'll work really intensively. And so without that sort of, I sort of tried, I did it a little, like my husband and I rented, as rented a cabin and went and, worked there, and it helped a little, but it really isn't the same experience as being with a bunch of writers. And I mean, it's certainly underlined for me that I like, sort of communal writing, and I like having, my friends around. I like being able to talk about work, and we have, like we get
Sure.
on Zoom and we do
We have
work.
Zoom.
We workshopped your book on Zoom, like
Hmm.
a last week or something like that. And it's it's different, I mean,
Yeah,
it's weird because I don't want to get that used to it, you know.
right.
Well, I want to get used to it a little bit, but I don't want to get too used to it because I still have this hope, that we'll go back to
Right.
a world where we can, be not separated from other people, which I think is just very difficult, psychologically for everybody. We all get a little bit strange. Spend a
So
lot of
you've
time with
been
cats.
you've been working on two different projects that during this period. You've been working on Swordcatcher, high fantasy, set in a secondary world, super distanced, and then you've been working on last hours, and you've been you know while it is certainly distanced in time, you have in the past gone to visit a lot of places um, as part of your process for writing, your historical novels. And so I'm curious if that's like if one feels easier, or if because they both involve places, the outside, normal life, feel almost equally challenging.
I mean, there are
I mean,
places.
a lot of the last book I wrote about people just calling each other and not going out.
Yeah, that's true. And I mean, at least for your book, which I don't want to spoil for people, it was local. But I know what you mean because even locally, like you couldn't go out and like walk around and look at stuff. And that's bizarre. I mean, I've used a lot of, Google Earth, but it's not the same. I'd like to go back to, I'd like to go to the places that I am researching, which in Chain of Thorns is like Paris and London. And, um, there are definitely some, places where I've left stuff blank in the hopes that, I will be able to go at some point before the book's due and actually see those places. So we'll see, what happens. And for Swordcatcher, like I think all high fantasy draws on real history and real places. So again, there's like a long list of places that I'd like to go and like actually see them and do some like historical research. And so it is, like you just feel like you're sort of doing everything remotely. Like I feel like I'm like James Cameron, like operating those little underwater robots that explore the Titanic or whatever. Like instead of actually exploring myself, I'm sort of doing it from a distance. And
Hmm.
it's weird. It's
Hmm.
definitely weird. I mean, it's interesting. There's a lot of
Yeah,
stuff that you learn that you can do remotely. These sort of
like this,
hmm? Like this. Yes,
like this.
we only live a mile apart, and here we are talking to each other on Zoom. But like, yeah, there's all this stuff that you learn you can do remotely, but it doesn't mean that you prefer necessarily to do it remotely. And I do think that there are some limits, to what you can do remotely, because definitely in terms of researching for last hours and infernal devices, I would say that being in London on several occasions was definitely invaluable. Like, I there were things that there's no way I could have figured out without actually being there.
Well, that brings me to the end of my questions, but I know that the audience has put many a question in the Q&A, so
Ah,
I'm
excellent.
excited to find out what they have to say.
Managed to remember to unmute. Um, okay, first audience question. The London Enclave feels so much bigger in this series than it did during the Infernal Devices. Has it grown a lot? And if so, why?
I would say that there's sort of a constant like a constant discussion among the characters that they're living in a time of unusual peace, and that they haven't dealt with any kind of demon attacks or any kind of real danger for a long time. So I think what we're seeing is the Enclave socializing a lot more. It's not like they didn't exist in, the Infernal Devices. We occasionally saw them, in big scenes. We would see, that there was a sizable group of people that lived in London, but they didn't really get together and go to parties, and they didn't get together and go to picnics, and they just didn't do that stuff because I think it's the thing that Will talks about in Chain of Gold, where he's like, I'm worried about our kids. They're sort of growing up like these mundanes, they're partying, and I mean, poor Will. He sounds like grandpa, but he's really, he's not saying like, these kids, they're so wild with their parties and their their drugs and rock and roll and sex and stuff. What he's saying is like, I'm worried that they're unprepared for the dangers of life because they're living in this time of immense like peace. And so I think that, the result of that is a far more active social life among the Enclave than we saw in the Infernal Devices. And that's why it feels bigger.
For the next question, there are obviously a lot of characters from the Infernal Devices that we see in the last hours, and a lot of new characters too. Were there any characters that you originally thought of but had to cut out, or any that drastically changed during your writing process?
I don't think there was anybody that I had to cut out. I mean, there were people I mean, okay. I mean, I did a terribly stupid thing, and I put a family tree into the back of Clockwork Princess, as Holly well knows. And this caused me no end of pain and sorrow. I mean, possibly without the family tree, I wouldn't have written the last hours, because it was staring at those names for such a long time that sort of gave me the idea of like, who are these people and what are their personalities like and how do they interact? But I also locked myself into having all of these characters that exist. So there weren't characters I had to get rid of, but there were definitely characters whose roles were reduced, that we see not as much of as we see of the main people, because there's just no way to have a 21 person main cast. It's overwhelming. So there are some people we rotate in and out of the books, or we don't see that much of them that often, Barbara and Eugenia, who are Thomas's older sisters. They had smaller parts. There was no way to create a group of friends that was that enormous and then actually be able to do them all justice. So I would say that I don't think anybody got invented and then cut out, though.
This is for both of you. Do you allow yourselves to stray from the detailed outlines that you create?
I'm laughing because of Holly. Oh no.
So
Right now.
when we had our workshop about my book this past week, our friend Kelly, at the end of it, she said, I come fully prepared for you to tell me that you had already rewritten the book in time. Yes. I'm a strayer.
She's a strayer from the outline. It's true.
Can't contain me.
Yeah, that's true. She cannot be corralled. Also,
I was mostly contained during Magisterium. What?
Yes, I contained her during Magisterium.
Mostly.
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 During Magisterium. I mean, she's not a containable force, but I did a lot of glaring, and then she did some glaring at me, but mostly we stuck to the outline. However, unconfined from my evil influence, Molly's a strayer from the outline, which is always exciting if you're her critique partner, because you're like, oh, I can't wait to find out what happens to Alicia and Jared today. We left them, at the train station about to be captured by the police, and she's like, oh, all of that is different. Alicia and Jared are dead, and the story is actually about this guy Barnaby, and he's one of the police officers, and the train station is now an airport. And you're like, okay.
It would be so good if that was it. It would be so good if that was an exaggeration, but it really isn't.
Not at all. I mean,
on the other hand, you like to think of yourself as sticking to the outline, but halfway through, you just change the whole outline, and then you're like, "Look, I'm sticking to it." And I'm like, but it's not the same outline.
You're not wrong. I mean, I think that you always make the changes at some point, right? Like I make them during the outlining process. You make them during the writing process. Things always change. I mean, also like I have a very weird outlining process, and I do like these macro outlines of like the book, and then I do micro outlines of like each chapter kind of thing. And Holly does not intend to do that because it is a bizarre thing to do. I mean, my outline for Chain of Iron was 60,000 words long. I know. Everyone's
Imagine
always
if I did that and then I just changed it all. It's not worth it.
I mean, that's a lot of
I
work.
think it seems great. Like the idea that you actually know what happens, that seems so wonderful to me.
Well, I just think that you work out the issues as you go. And so the question is, do you work out the issues in the outlining process, which requires a really detailed outline, or do you work out the issues during the writing process? So I think it just depends what point of the process you're in that you do that stuff. I mean, I know people who are like, I just wing it. I don't have an outline. I just finished the book. And I'm like, yeah, but then you spend a year doing revisions. Like, you're not doing that work. You're just doing it at a different stage. We all know that.
Who is your favorite character from the Shadowhunter series?
Me?
Are you willing to say?
No, I'll be murdered. And I don't really have a favorite character, like, because I like them all, but in different ways. I mean, there are definitely characters I don't particularly, have a great fondness for, villains especially. But there, I do really genuinely like them all in different ways. I like Tessa. She has, the same kind of reading habits as me, but then I like Lucy because she's a lot like I was when I was her age and I wrote all of these really terrible novels. I wrote a book called The Beautiful Cassandra, which is the basis for her book, The Beautiful Cordelia. And they're both bad. And so I relate to her on that level. I relate to Simon. I'm not like Magnus, but I wish I was like Magnus. I love Will, I love Jem. It's really hard to pick, and I love the characters who are flawed. I love Matthew, and all of his flawed drunk glory.
This is from Rachel. She's 14 years old. She loves the Shadowhunter Chronicles. She's currently reading The Folk of the Air. She has several questions. I'll start with what do Magnus's eyes look like when glamorized to a mundane?
I think he plays around. I'd like to think he's, he can glamour his eyes to look like whatever he wants. So I think sometimes he's got green eyes, sometimes he's got brown eyes, sometimes he's got blue eyes, whatever he's feeling at the moment.
How did Valentine get the same copy of A Tale of Two Cities that Will and Tessa have? And did it disappear with the apartment?
That is some true.
That's a great question.
Very impressed. You will find out. Many people have asked me this question, and it is the same copy, and it's not destroyed forever. I know that Carrie blew up Valentine's entire apartment, and the only thing anybody cares about is that she thinks they're worried she blew up the copy of Tale of Two Cities that used to belong to Will, which I totally understand.
And is the Internal Devices going to be a TV show?
I don't know. It's one of those things where, and Holly can back me up on this. You wind up in these situations where people approach you about making a TV show. So we've been approached about making a TV show of the Infernal Devices many times by different people, and it'll go through these phases of having, you have talks, you have meetings, you have you talk about what it's going to be like. They'll attach somebody to write a script, and then something will happen. And usually the thing with the Infernal Devices is that it's a historical show. And so there's always, you get to the point where, everything's lined up. We had, a screen the last time we had someone to direct the first episode, we had a screenplay, we had all this stuff, but it fell apart at the budget stage because just the sheer cost of creating all of this historical setting of, creating the costumes, all of that is very daunting. And so it's hard to get somebody to commit to doing that. So I continue to be hopeful that they will make it. We continue to have people who want to make it. And it continues to be one of those things where I believe that I'm not going to get my hopes up until they're actually rolling cameras, because really it's one of those things you never know how it's going to turn out.
Does Tessa and or Magnus follow boy bands throughout the years? And if so, who do they like? Who do they like best from One Direction?
Boy, my complete ignorance of One Direction is really going to show here, because I only know one person from One Direction. That is Harry Styles. So I'm just going to say Harry Styles because I don't know any of the rest of them are. I'm very old. I apologize. Do you know any of them, Holly?
No, no.
We want to be helpful, but we are uncool. I'm sorry.
If you could choose only one Shadowhunter generation to write about, which would it have been?
Oh
Oh wow.
no. Wait, why does this happen? So I'm only able to like write one series?
Apparently,
I
You
guess
should pick one you haven't done yet.
yeah, that's a good idea. The Shadow Hunters of the Roaring 20s. That seems fun. I mean, I probably would pick the historicals because I enjoyed the research so much and I would not want to miss out on being able to do it. I really love doing the research, but it doesn't mean that like I like those characters more than like the characters from the Dark Artifices or the or the Mortal Instruments or the upcoming Wicked Powers or anything like that. I love them equally. And I think there's a thing about writers that people do not understand, which is that we always love the project that we're not working on yet. Wouldn't you say that's true? Like you're
Very
gonna
true. That
something,
project is gonna be so simple.
it's gonna
It's
be
gonna
so
be so
good.
great, so beautiful,
I know.
so
Yeah, it's gonna
easy.
be fantastic. It's gonna be easy. I know what it's gonna be like. I know how it's gonna work out. It's gonna be awesome. You're always mentally cheating on your current project with your next project. So, like, even though I'm working on Swordcatcher and
1000%.
Thorns at the same time, I'm mentally cheating with the Wicked Powers. You're always cheating with the thing that you're not working on.
if you had to battle one of
It's
your
the only time it'd be fun
characters,
to work.
if you had to battle one of your characters, which one would you choose?
Can I battle one of Holly's characters?
Sure.
I would battle Carden.
We
He's
can-
terrible at it.
so bad. It's true.
I mean, unless he's hiding behind
I
James.
thought maybe you'd battle Church.
You'd battle Church? He's an innocent cat. Well, he's got powers. You
That's
don't
why I'd win.
know about his powers. All right, fine. I'll fight Carden and you can fight Church. Okay.
Is the character Cruel Prince James a tribute to Holly Black's novel?
It's not a coincidence. When did I tell you about Cruel Prince James? I can't remember.
What?
When did I tell you about Cruel Prince James? I can't remember.
It seems a long time ago now.
I know it was. I mean, indeed, it was supposed to be like 2018 or something like that. No, I mean, absolutely, it's a tribute. I mean, I think one of the things that's important to understand is that I read Holly's books at like sort of every stage of their production, so every draft, and she reads my books at every stage of their production, so every draft, and it's hard, I think, for us not to mess with each other to some extent by including together personable, fun, funny, or amusing, or referential to something that we both know. And I can't remember. I think I was when I was coming up with ridiculous books for Lucy to have written. One of them is called, I believe it's Secret Princess Lucy is Rescued from Her Terrible Family. And I had to include Cruel Prince James because I there was something in there where she was like, and her brother was a prince, but he was very cruel. And I was like, Cruel Prince, this is great. I can make a hilarious joke that will totally annoy Holly. Everything that I want is here. So yeah, no, that's totally a reference.
Which leads to the question, do you already have the names of your characters in mind, or do you choose them after you've created the character?
What do you think?
I think that I can never really have a character be fully alive unless I know what their name is. And I go through a process of trying out different names a lot of times, or messing around with names until I know the right name. And when I know the right name, weirdly, I know a lot more about that person. I'm not really sure why.
Yeah, I mean, I think that maybe it's just a facet of knowing the character is that the name sort of falls into place because it's the right name for that character, but you need to know the character in order to know the right name for them. I know that there are characters that I've written where I've gone through different processes trying to name them and trying to figure out who their what their names are going to be. But by the time I know who they are, it's sort of cemented in with the name.
Right. You just had a case where you were thinking about changing a name and, you had every reason to change it, but you were like, I can't change it because it's their name.
I know. And I'm still stuck with it. So thanks for reminding me. So, I have a character in Swordcatcher whose name I know I should change, but that's their name as far as I'm concerned. And so it's really difficult. And in some ways, it's almost easier to write the whole book with that as their name and then replace it out like one short, sharp shock than it is to try to retrain your brain.
Will we see more Matthew Fairchild and Anna Lightwood antics?
I mean, definitely. Matthew and Anna are all about the antics. And we're definitely going to see more of them. We sort of saw them team up a lot in Chain of Gold, since they're both kind of bohemian and a little bit outside the Shadowhunters tend to be kind of conservative, and Anna and Matthew, I think, find that to be boring. And yeah, they want to go hang out with downrollers, and they want to hang out with cool mundanes, and they want to listen to poetry and drink absinthe and do all the fun things like that are available to them. And so they did a little bit of that with the Helwerwell in the first book, and they definitely they antic up in the second book, like separately and together.
One's just come in. If you accidentally or purposefully murdered somebody and are in hiding, which character would you most hate to have as your investigator?
Hmm. Huh. This is a person who has given a lot of thought to murder. We admire that.
Right?
Who would I not want as my investigator? I think I probably wouldn't want Magnus investigating me. He has a lot of smart. He has a lot of magical powers. He would almost certainly rumble me, and I would be caught. And I don't want to be caught. I want to get away with it.
Jem. I would go with Jem. I think he would look me in the face and be like, "You killed that guy."
And then you would feel like you had to admit it.
And then he would reach into my mind.
Now, I would not want Jude investigating me, because she would just threaten me, and then I would be like, well, I guess I better give it up or I'll be killed.
I think if you're going to give it up that easily, you've got a bigger problem.
I want to be murdered in Fairy or anywhere.
Can you tell us more about Grace's bracelet?
The bracelet.
What does it do?
Well, what it does is one of the mysteries of the series, though you will certainly find out in book 2. By the end of the book, you definitely know what the bracelet does. It has a multitude of different powers.
Did you just call it the bracelet?
Everyone calls it the bracelet. All my fans call it the bracelet. I totally admire that as an excellent word. Neologism. So I totally stole it from them. You definitely find out what Grace's bracelet. See, it's much easier to say the bracelet does.
The
bracelet by the end of book 2, and it has a lot of weird powers, and you will find out why, since you'll find out who gave it to her and why they gave it to her and all of that. But it works. The things I can say about the bracelet are it only works on men, which is kind of one of the interesting things about it, and it sort of is linked to Miss Havisham and the Great Expectations thing, because Miss Havisham created Estella to be a weapon against men specifically. So I sort of carried that over to the bracelet. And it also, one of the things that the bracelet does is when it does its magical stuff, immediately makes the person that it affected forget. So they'll remember for like a second, oh, something strange happened, or, oh, I mean, in the first book, I believe Grace uses it to make Matthew kiss her. He doesn't remember that happened. And, there are several times in this book where James thinks, I'm going to take this off. And then as soon as he has that thought, he'll go to get something to, like cut the bracelet off him. And by the time he gets there, he doesn't remember what he was planning on doing or why. So it has that sort of befuddling the mind characteristic that makes it very difficult to push back on.
What risks have you taken with your writing that have paid off?
That's an interesting question.
question. I mean, I think sometimes, and I feel like this is true for you, but I will see if you agree. I think sometimes you have an idea in your head that you think this is a thing I like, but I have no idea if anyone else will like because it's pretty weird. And in my experience, that is the stuff people like the most, but I would never have guessed it. And I think it feels like a risk every time you do it, where you think, okay, this is my weird thing. And this is my, how I want to approach this material, even though no other human being will like it. And then, it is often a surprise when they do.
I mean, totally. Like, I wrote City of Bones, and I was like, at the end of this book, people will find out that Jason and Clary are brother and sister. And I was like, no one's going to like this, but I like it. I think it's exciting, and I think it's, different, and I think it's shocking.
Messed up.
Interesting. It's mad. And I think without having written that, I would not have a career at all. Like, I think that, making that decision made those books different from other books, and that's significant, and ditto. I think when I decided I wanted to, I remember when I went to my editor and was like, I want to write more Shadowhunter books. And she was like, great, more books about, Jason Clary. And I was like, actually, these are going to be set in 1878 and they're about totally different people and they're historical. And I could tell that she was like, this is insane. Like, why would you do that? Like, it's so different. But I really, I really loved writing the Infernal Devices. And I feel like, people really love the things about it that I loved. So I think Holly is correct.
How did both of you meet, and what's your favorite book of each other's?
Ooh. We met at Books of Wonder in New York, which is a children's bookstore, and Holly was doing her first ever signing, and I knew about you because was it because my friend, it was Emily reviewed your book, right? So my friend
then
Emily,
gave it to you.
Yes, my friend Emily reviewed Holly's book Tithe for the Mythopoeic Society, and then she gave it to me, and she said, "You're really going to like this book because it has Kirk Spock slash in it."
That's not true. It has a line about Kirk Spock slash.
It has a line about Kirk Spock slash. So she sold it to me on false pretenses, but I did actually like it, and I actually don't know anything about Kirk Spock slash, so I don't know. But I was like, huh. And I really did like it, and I was like, oh, this Holly seems like a cool person. I'm gonna go into her, signing in at Books of Wonder, and I went. I remember you were signing with Tammy Pierce.
No, I wrote to you.
Oh, you wrote to me. Why did you write to me?
I wrote to you. I said, I don't know. You were saying something. You had some, but you had. I was.
Maybe I mentioned your book on my blog. Was that it?
Maybe, could be. But I remember writing to you, and then you were like, and that's how I knew it was you.
Yes, that's true.
Signing.
So and was like, I enjoyed your blog, and I was like, I read your book, right? And then she was like, that's impossible. No one's read my book, and I was like, but I have read your book. And then she mentioned that she was doing this signing, and I was like,
that is true.
So when I came to the signing, I was able to say to her, I am Cassie Clare. I wrote to you. And would you like to come have coffee with me? And no one had told Holly that she's not supposed to go places with people she doesn't know from the internet. And so we went.
That was my first book signing. You can convince people of anything at their first book signing.
You did look like you were like
Angela's like.
I mean, that's totally true. And I was very nice and charming, and took her out to coffee, and we talked about the books that we enjoyed. And I told her about some book I was working on that was really terrible, and she was like, okay, how about that? And later, when I came up with the idea for City of Bones, you were very relieved.
Yeah, it was an evil wizard of some kind.
Yeah, there was like an evil wizard or something. I don't know what I was thinking about.
His name Vexor?
I think it became a short story that I published called The Girl's Guide to Defeating the Dark Lord. Yeah. But it was not enough there for an actual novel. And yes, that is how we met. I convinced her to go out and talk to me about, we bought some shoes. Yes. And, it's nice to meet somebody who reads the same books you do, has the same influences. We were excited that we all had read like a lot of the same authors, and we liked a lot of the same authors, and so we kept up our correspondence.
I think my favorite book of yours, this is really hard.
It's hard.
Yeah. It's a combination, though the reasons are a combination of the book itself, things I think you did in it, and also the memory of it. I think probably Clockwork Princess.
Hmm.
I think that was such a, I don't know, just I remember all the things that you did working on it. I remember reading over certain scenes like 15 times because you wanted to make me cry. I mean, are you like, did you cry
Are you
yet?
sad?
Did
Did you
you cry
cry?
yet? And also, I think it was a time when you also had, I don't know, I think it was a period when you were writing something you really, really loved. And for the, like, and without, like, I think you knew exactly what you were doing and you were doing it
Mm-hmm.
in a way that previously, I think you were not having as much fun doing it as you were with that book.
That's interesting. I mean, I don't think that's possible. I have very fond memories of writing Clockwork Princess. And I think, I mean, it's really hard to choose. Uh, but I mean, it's interesting because I have a really fond memories of you writing Black Heart and Curse Workers.
Oh yeah,
You know,
yeah.
so I remember we were in Mexico. Holly was working on it, and I don't know. I just feel like it was. I think it's one of the only times you've stuck to an outline. The Curse Workers books,
So true.
the outlines, and you actually stuck to them. That was
Because you
amazing.
can't change a heist.
Yes, I think it was something about how much you really love heist books and like crime books and
Mhm.
like all of that like
Mhm.
sort of came out in the writing, in the Curse Workers, and it just had a really like strong sense too of like New Jersey and like the places that you grew up, and like it just had this really strong Holly sense to me of like this is sort of Holly's the things she loves and also the experiences in her life. And there is
Mhm.
one really great scene in the book. If you haven't read it, I'm not going to spoil it for you, but the main character gives a speech and all of our friends came together to help Holly workshop that speech, and I just
This is
absolutely
very
love this
true.
speech in literature. It's so good.
Everybody had a line to add.
We did. We all had something to say. It was awesome. And one of the things I really miss too is like we could blocked out. I was working on Clockwork Princess, you were working on Blackheart, and we were blocking out like our action scenes and stuff like that. So we had like our friends come in and like, we blocked out so scenes,
I
fighting
was
scenes,
very,
action scenes,
yeah,
and
the
also
vampires.
yes,
Remember
I
we
have
all had to be the
video of
vampires?
us pretending to be vampires for some scene in Clockwork Princess or something like that where we're
In the
fighting.
theater.
I remember Paolo was vampire twins.
Wow.
Mm, yeah, so it's all things I think were, when we think about like the books the other person wrote, we think about like the whole Gestalt experience of like being
Right.
there for the writing of the book and what the book sort of means to you about like that time period and your friend and all that other stuff. So I would say Blackheart.
So I know this time has gone very quickly, but it's that time.
Oh
So
no.
do either of you have, I think this is going to be our last question, advice for young authors? There's a lot of people out there who are writing their own books. Do you have advice for them?
I mean, I would say that you should find someone who is a critique partner. Um, and there are various ways that you can do that in terms of like, reaching out. Critter, I think, does critters.org still exist? Because they used to match people up with critique partners, but, or you could, there are all sorts of places, online and in real life that you can find other writers who, are workshopping together. But having somebody else in your life who will read your work and give you feedback and tell you, kind of keep you on a schedule is really invaluable, I think.
True. And Cassie, you always give a great speech about finishing books.
That's
About and it is, and it always sticks me like an arrow in the heart because I didn't finish my first book and it took me like 5 years to write it.
I didn't even
Um
finish my first 16 books, so
I just keep rewriting it from the start. But I think, it is, she's always talking about how like get to the end, like make it to the end, even if it's flawed, even if even if you're really having trouble. And it stuck with me because I do feel like once you get to the end of a book, you see it in a very different way.
and there's something about finishing, it's so hard to get to finish. And you are beset by so many doubts along the way. We're all, have those voices in our head that say, you know, that what we're doing isn't good, it's not good enough, it's not right, it's broken in some way. And that makes it extremely hard to finish. But in terms of the people I've known in my life who have wanted to be writers, the ones who have become writers, the only thing that sets them apart from the people who haven't are that they finish. So
So
finish.
before we go, what is the percentage chance that we can see Reginald? Is he
I don't know
gone?
where he is.
Is that
I
guy
got a
gone?
different cat, but like I don't know if
You got a
another
different cat?
cat-
You got a cat for us?
I got a cat. I got a cat. I'll get a cat. There
Let's
will
get a
be
cat.
We all want to see the cat.
I want to see the cat. I know the audience is with me. I can't
We
see you
know
guys.
all
I
of
can't
right.
hear you guys. I know you're with me that we want a cat.
Reginald, come and meet your public.
What a great way to end.
All right,
Yay.
Reginald.
Buddy.
Reginald, say bye. Bye. All right, thank you everybody for coming. Reginald really hates the light. It's giving him some kind of agita. But all right.
Thank you everyone so much for coming. That was such a wonderful conversation. And now all I want to do is start the book. Thank you everyone for joining us. Remember, you can pick up copies of Cassie Clare's and Holly Black's book at keplers.com. Tonight's event was produced by Keplers Literary Foundation. If you're in a position to contribute to keep us producing events like this, please consider a donation. There's a donate button at keplers.org. And if you'd like to get in touch with us directly, our contact button is there too. Stay in touch with us. Check out our upcoming events under the heading Refresh the Page. Next week, we're launching Kelly Lloyd Gilbert's new book, When We Were Infinite, and celebrating a week early for Anna Marie McElmore's new book, The Mirror Season. It's going to be a great event. It's on March 9th. And then we'll be launching Stacey Lee's newest book, Luck of the Titanic, with Stephanie Garber on May 4th. So mark your calendars, stay well, be happy, and have a good night.
Good night, everybody. Thank you for coming.
Good night.